going to be a hot and a dry summer. The ground is dry, and daily we, like most people in the western states, turn our eyes toward the heavens. We look for rain, the blessings of cool and refreshing water in abundance. I probably didn't need the reminder about the importance of water, but recently it came. Young people at the local church where I attend went on a walk to raise funds for drilling deep water wells in developing countries. I saw the pictures. There were dozens, if not hundreds, of children and families out there engaged in this walk. And through the proceeds, they're enabling people in 2 villages in different countries to receive life-giving water, free of pollutants and diseases. For those of us who live in Texas, water is precious. But this kind of water brings healing. Healing that is truly grace. In our text today, the descendants of Israel were finally on the move. The time of slavery had ended. The problematic negotiations between Pharaoh and Moses had run their course. Yahweh had decisively defeated the Egyptians in the plague contests and at the Sea of Reeds. Moses and Miriam had sung the songs of victory. Thy right hand, O Lord, glorious in power. Thy right hand, O Lord, shatters the enemy. All that is over. Now delivered, they start out for Sinai and finally to the land. They are on the move. But the way is through the wilderness. They go 3 days in the hot, dry, barren territory, somewhere out there in the desert. Water is nowhere to be found. For my generation, an early scene in the movie Lawrence of Arabia comes to mind. Lawrence is at a well, and gradually a figure on a camel comes into view across the desert. You know trouble is in the wind. Whose water will it really be? But at least for those children, Jacob, there was a well. But here, where is the water? Has Yahweh given them a Pyrrhic victory over the Egyptians? They're on the way to the promised land, but will they perish before they arrive? Is this all a cruel trick, a cosmic joke? Then comes Murrah. Water at last. But verse 23 brings us to the sad word. The etymology of the word signifies what it means, bitter. 4 times in this verse, counting the name The water is described as bitter. Speaking of the movies, this is not Lawrence of Arabia anymore, but it sounds more like an old Clint Eastwood low-budget movie. There's trouble here. And so we have the beginning of the famous murmuring of the people getting underway. Moses, as servant of the Lord, has to act. Strange verse. The Lord leads him to find a piece of wood. Moses throws it into the water becomes sweet. Shortly thereafter, they come to Elim. Here they find a wonderful oasis, and seemingly they survive to live another day. This kind of experience that I've just narrated is, of course, repeated in other places in the biblical narrative. Think of Daniel and his companions as the people of God undergo severe ordeal. But God has not abandoned those who are his own. That's the good word in Daniel, it's the good word here. But I believe if we look at the text, there's something just a little bit more. It's typical of the Bible that when we look a second time at a text, that something more comes out. For us budding exegetes, that's a tip for the morning. And this word comes in Exodus 15:25, the latter part of it, and verse 26. After the bitter water at Marah turns sweet, we're told, rather oddly, that on the spot the Lord makes a statute and an ordinance. Well, why would he do this? There are several chapters away from Sinai. The Lord is in the business of making statutes and ordinances. Why didn't he wait till then to add one more to the list? Why now? Does not seem to fit the flow of the narrative. It's puzzling. Some suggest that we need to look at the text from a later perspective. Centuries have passed before the Torah is finally put together in its present form. By then it has a kind of eternal quality. Who cares when it was given? It's just part of the body of Torah, maybe. Well, then what was the ordinance, the statute that we read about this morning? It comes in the form of a promise actually connected with a test. And this is the promise, I am the Lord, the healer. Now think about that for just a moment. Sinai is before them. There they will receive a whole body of teaching, presumably designed to preserve the community from disorientation, internal decay, sickness, and death. What the Lord is doing here is he promises to heal them if they will keep Torah. And perhaps this statute is given at this time in anticipation of the journey in a few days to the mount. They have time to think about it. What it is really promising is that abiding in Torah will keep people from the realm of death. I, the Lord, am your healer. Israel remembers well the situation with Pharaoh and his minions in Egypt. 3 times in Exodus 7, we're told that water, the source of life, becomes undrinkable when the ruler's heart became hardened. Will the Israelites encounter with God's word at Sinai a similar process? Will they become hardened? It's noteworthy that right at the end of the book of the covenant, in Exodus 23, 25 through 26, we find these words: "You shall serve the Lord your God, and I will bless your bread and your water, and I will take sickness away from the midst of you. None shall cast her young or be barren in your land. I will fulfill the number of your days." Yes, along with the promise comes the test. Will they keep Torah? Now, some of you may be thinking, is this promise of healing simply a metaphor for a healthy community existence? Peace and prosperity in the land? If they keep Torah? I think that's primarily what it is, but to be sure, that in itself is a massive promise. But then you may ask, what about me, the individual believer? Where do I stand in all of this? After all, I look out here this morning and I see a number of you who are right now acquainted with sickness. And we all have our brush with that. So where do I stand? Is it a promise for physical help? Can we get this down on the ground? One of his books, Gerhard Lofink narrates a quip from Woody Allen about Christians who claim that the Messiah has come and done some concrete things and started a new creation. Allen, who's the quintessential New York cynical comic, I suppose, states, you know, there's no question that there is an unseen world. The problem is, how far is it from Midtown and how late is it open? Cynical, but is our faith real? What about this promise? I, the Lord, am your healer. Yes, I believe the Torah held out the promise that God would sustain his people through difficult times, even in exile in a foreign land. The Lord heals his people. Jesus has promised to be with his people to the end. A good word as we come to the end of the semester. He'll not abandon us. The new creation has begun. The grace of healing is here. Not only does it take place now, but sickness itself will be no more at the last day. He is the one who proclaimed, "If anyone thirst, let him come to me and drink. He who believes in me, as the Scriptures has said, out of his heart shall flow rivers of living water." Now this he said about the Spirit, which those who believed in him were to receive. There is nothing more real than bread and water. God's word that he is a healer is just as sure for his people today.